Hi everyone and welcome. Today is a very exciting day here at Verified First because we are joined by Chris Courneen, MSI's Global Head of HR, to discuss Proving Value, how HR wins corporate buy-in. This past year, we've spent our time having important conversations with some of America's most notable leaders in the HR and TA space. Through our HR at the Table Thought Leadership webinars, we've discussed the role HR and TA have in DE&I, brand, technology, talent, culture, leadership, and so much more. Our goal is to bring relevant and timely topics to our HR and TA community that supports you in your roles. All of these topics can be accessed through our HR at the Table resources page on our website at verifiedfirst.com. With each webinar you watch, you can earn 1 SHRM and 1 HRCI credit. You also have the option to receive credit for attending today's webinar too. If these discussions are important to you, be sure to check out our HR at the Table calendar to keep up to date on topics that we're talking about. We've also worked hard to bring you a comprehensive deep dive of all of the topics we've discussed through this series. So if you'd like to gather more insight, be sure to check out our blog page, also at verifiedfirst.com. Now, before we dive into today's discussion, I'd like to discuss some housekeeping items. As I mentioned, this webinar is available for 1 SHRM and 1 HRCI credit. For our live attendees looking to receive credit, be sure to stick around for our post-webinar survey. If you're listening to this on demand, check your email for instructions on how to redeem your credit. Don't worry, this webinar is being recorded, so you can use it as a resource, pass it along to your coworkers, or watch it whenever you want. We'd love for you to utilize the chat function during this event to send in any questions that you have for our speakers. To prepare, let's practice now. In the chat feature, let us know where you're tuning in from and what the weather is like in your neck of the woods. Verified First is located in Boise, Idaho, and today it's a sunny 73 outside. All right, with that in mind, I'd like to start by thanking HiBob and Workable for sponsoring this episode of HR at the Table and by efficiently welcoming everyone to today's discussion. Please send a friendly hello and a warm welcome in the chat to our HR at the Table host, Brianna Rosencrans, and Chris Courneen, MSI's Global Head of HR. Without further ado, take it away, Brianna.
All right, well, thank you for that introduction and welcome to episode 6 of our second season of HR at the Table. Now, today we're going to be talking about how HR can be more than just a cost center and how they can prove their value by winning corporate buy-in, whether it's from executive leaders or from the employees themselves. So today we're going to cover topics like the importance of HR business partnerships, best practices for aligning HR with business goals, measuring ROI on people-centric initiatives, and how HR can change the way people think about HR in business. Now, I'm just looking at the chat here. I see that some of you are located in very hot areas. So like our initial host was saying, the temperature here in Idaho is actually 72, about to be 82. Chris, I'm curious, what's the temperature like where you're at?
It sounds a lot like Idaho. It's 78. It'll be 88 today, so not too horrible.
Yeah, not too bad. Awesome. Well, I want to go ahead and introduce who we have here today. So back in early 2021, in February, for our second ever episode of HR at the Table, we hosted the global head of HR at MSI, Chris Courneen. And in that conversation, we talked about CEO and HR alignment. It was an amazing conversation. Everybody loved it. And because of that, we have invited Chris back for another conversation on how HR can win corporate buy-in. So with that, Chris, I'd love to formally welcome you back. And with that, can you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Yeah, so my name is Chris Courneen. I'm sitting out here in sunny California, work for MS International. We're the kind of leading, I'll call it floor and hard surfaces product distributor in North America. So if you have something other than carpet on your floor, or a stone countertop or a mosaic backsplash, there's a good chance it either came from us, we invented the product, or we helped popularize the product in the United States. So we're a family-owned business. We have about 50 locations scattered around the globe, a few thousand employees in the U.S. We have folks in Canada and a fairly sizable team in India as well, and then some folks scattered around the world helping us, source materials. So HR for our organization is a lot of fun. We operate in basically every major metropolitan region in the U.S., so nearly every state in the country, multiple countries around the world. So it's always a fun time.
Yeah, it sounds like fun. Well, Chris, we appreciate having you back today. I'm really excited to continue this conversation on how HR can win that corporate buy-in. Now, with that, I want to quickly introduce myself. My name is Brianna Rosenkrantz. I am the Partner Marketing Manager Team Lead here at Verified First, and also the host for this discussion. So the first thing that I want to do right now is I actually want to go ahead and launch a quick poll question to get us started in our conversation. This is a routine poll question that we ask. It's something we include in our talent acquisition technology buyer's guide to really understand some of the trends or things that HR is trying to prioritize within their organization. So this will help us understand some of the things that your HR department is trying to prioritize so we can keep it in mind throughout the conversation. Now, Chris, as everyone's going ahead and answering that poll question, I'm curious, based on today's market, what do you think the poll responses will reflect?
There are a little over 5 million more jobs in today's market than there are unemployed folks in the US. So I am going to take a stab at reducing time to fill, although I will say these are all very related. But time to fill has always been a key metric, I think, for TA folks, but in particular in today's environment, that's a pretty imperative one. We have so many open jobs.
All right, well, we've got a good chunk of the audience who's answered, so I want to go ahead and take a look at what their responses to this were, and Chris, maybe see if there's any surprises for you. All right, so looking at the results here, it looks like 52% are interested in reducing time to fill, 66% interested in improving quality of hire, 30% improving compliant processes, 52% having an effective onboarding process, and 44% improving candidate engagement. So any surprises here on this?
No, I'll tell you the quality of the hire is, I think, probably the number one focus for this idea of getting the right person for the right job, and I would say that the quality of the hire, that doesn't surprise me at all. What surprises me a little is an effective onboarding process, and maybe that's because I know a number of places that are probably going through a similar journey as we are as an organization at MSI. But I'll tell you, an effective onboarding process dramatically, I think, impacts the overall engagement of a new hire. I think the stat is like, within the first 3 days, most people have an impression about a business that's going to impact whether or not they stay there for a year. And we are putting at MSI a tremendous amount of focus on that onboarding process for our internal IT work. So I'm excited to see that it's as high as it is, although I'm a little surprised, but in a good way.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate the insight there. Now, I think this is something great we keep in consideration throughout today's conversation to understand what people are trying to solve for. But with that, I want to go ahead and get into our first topic today, and that is the importance of HR business partnerships. So first, I want to go ahead and level set. And Chris, can you go ahead and talk about what the role of HR even is in an organization?
This is probably one of my favorite topics, mostly because I think there are many related ideas or answers to this. But I like being very, very blunt. So I'll tell you that HR's role or function within the organization should be no different than any other part of the organization. HR's function is, our role that we play is to maximize the profits of the company. And I think of this, from that standpoint, and frequently have to go back to, ultimately, we're all working toward the same goal, and that goal is to maximize the profits of the company. The tactics different parts of our organization might use to achieve that ultimate goal, or the goals that we might set for ourselves to help us achieve that ultimate goal, might look a little different, but the goal is the same. And I think that's the starting point, probably for a lot of the discussion, even around alignment with executives within your organization, and getting the kind of buy-in necessary to do the work that we're doing, and probably the reminder that we need to constantly have for ourselves, because then it helps you get down to topics like measuring ROI and all of that, which is the work that we're doing making this place more profitable, and the million different ways that you can measure that, some of which I would probably argue our HR folks are better at thinking of some of the ways that maybe your sales team isn't thinking, or maybe your marketing team isn't thinking, or maybe your operations team is not thinking. And so part of our job is to be creative, to manage the things that are tough to manage as it relates to our people, but also to measure the things that are probably a lot tougher to measure than, did sales go up, did I reduce time to ship, or these metrics that I think are probably easier to understand, easier to measure. But when you talk about the cost of turnover, can you put that into dollars? What am I costing the business every time someone walks out the door? Well, that's impacting the profitability of the company. And so ultimately, I would say that is really our goal, to help make our organizations more profitable.
Okay, Chris, I'm curious. So you said that your opinion of HR might be a little different than other people's opinion of it. So, if your goal is as an HR professional to maximize the profits of an organization, how does that differentiate based on what people think HR's goal is?
I've had a lot of folks say, version of a few different things. Some people will go, oh, well, HR's job is to protect the company, to mitigate or manage risk. I'll tell you, in the list of things that I think, personally, my job is, managing or mitigating risk is not in the top three. It is part of the job, but it's a part of it, and it is not the obsession. And I think, there are a number of ways I have learned this lesson, but I think I strongly disagree with folks that say, okay, HR's job is to really just manage some element of risk for the business, particularly as it relates to people, which represent maybe one of the larger risks to a business. I also tend to disagree with folks that say, well, HR's job is to, be there for employees, to support employees. I think that's a tactic, but I think it's missing the bigger picture. I think part of our job is to make sure that employees feel empowered and engaged and supported. But the ultimate, kind of question in my mind is, how does that make the business more profitable? And can I get to the real end of the business? We're more profitable when employees are engaged. There are plenty of studies that say employees are more productive when they're engaged. We also know that turnover goes down, and turnover is expensive. We know that when employees feel like they can trust their company, their boss, their organization, they're willing to go above and beyond. If I feel like you're doing something for me, I want to do something for you, that sort of idea. But again, I'd probably call those tactics to what is ultimately a group of people who should be making business decisions all day long. And so your HR team should be making business decisions, not HR decisions. And I think it's just a shift in the mindset of what our role is within an organization. It's a shift in how we think of ourselves, just slightly. And that pivot, I think, leads to better analysis and better decision making within an HR organization, which therefore is going to get you a lot more buy-in from the rest of your leadership team.
Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit more about some of the myths versus realities in the HR space. So I'm excited to kind of hear your insight on that, Chris. But I know that in the last conversation we had, you talked about forming internal partnerships as HR with other departments. So can you go ahead and talk a little bit more about what those partnerships look like?
I'll give you probably a very tangible example for us, particularly navigating through COVID. But in general, I, I don't think an HR organization can be successful if it's operating in a vacuum or kind of on its own island. Right? We're not the police. We're not this group that's kind of off to the side of the business doing admin work or whatever the case may be. And so I'd start with the partnerships with the folks across the organization are vital to HR adding the level of value that it should be adding. Some of those partnerships exist to either help me accomplish a goal or help me better serve the organization's mission, and they're maybe more useful to me than they are to the folks I'm partnering with. And some of those partnerships are mutually beneficial, and some of those partnerships, you might even wonder, why is HR involved in this? Is this really HR work? And I think, on a tangible level, I can give you a few examples at how at least I have approached my role at MSI, where I think very deeply. For example, if there are topics that, either by topic or subject, or topics by way of experience or wisdom, that we can add value to participating in, then we should participate. And probably the most finite example of this is if you think back to the CARES Act during COVID. There were a lot of things that came about throughout the CARES Act as it relates to, I think most people know about the PPPs and all the help for small businesses, none of which MSI benefits from because we're large. But there were a lot of very complicated changes to how the IRS and the tax code worked for businesses. And some of those changes, to fully understand the impact on the business, required a deep level understanding of the strategies that we chose to employ to keep our people safe and to keep them employed during COVID. Some of them were about strategies we employed at a field level, at a showroom environment, and what we did with folks. Some of them are about things that happen behind the scenes. I end up partnering very closely with our finance VP to make sure that my level of understanding of the detail in the operation, the strategies we employed, the strategies we had and the tactics we used were understood by a group of folks who may not have been as close to some of those decisions as HR is, because I've got folks on the ground in a showroom or in a warehouse working with our employees. And so that's an experiential level of knowledge, but also, I think part of the benefit is we read a lot of laws in HR. We get pretty good at reading pretty poorly written laws as well. And so how can I partner and use some of that expertise to help someone who may not actually be reading an 800-page law on a regular basis, where I'm reading court decisions and laws on a fairly regular basis? So some of it is, hey, let me give you a hand because I'm used to the mumbo jumbo. Some of it is, hey, let me give you a hand because I also have a in-depth level of knowledge that will help inform what you think you should be doing from a strategy perspective. Some of it is, make really good friends with your marketing VP. You need their help. You can't do it all on your own. And part of, what we did this year is we launched an all new, this is not that exciting, but it's an internal benefits website that was actually very important to us because it solved a problem that employees had. I couldn't have done that without a very good partnership with our marketing team and without a very good partnership with our IT team, who can then co-develop something for us. And those are minor examples. I think there are some larger examples, which is when you're making big company level decisions and you're trying to decide, do we do option A or option B? And you have a handful of people in a room. You need to have established relationships and partnerships with those folks. So I also fully and deeply understand they're quote unquote part of the business. How can I add value in a conversation if I don't even have the credibility of understanding they're part of the business? And I might be able to bring a perspective to an idea that they may have missed. And so some of that is we look at blind spots, or we look for things that maybe people aren't always looking for, but without the trust that is developed by partnering closely, even at times when I may not think, oh, I don't really need the help, but I'm going to go ask for the help, in part because I want to develop these relationships. So when it comes 18 months from now and we've got to put our heads together, I'm going to have credibility with you when I say, yeah, it's a great idea, but have we thought about this? And so sometimes those partnerships are important simply because it helps build some of that credibility as well.
Yeah, Chris, I'm curious, how would you say that partnerships with HR and another department impact company culture?
You know, maybe the most obvious of these has been this shift to hybrid work that many companies have gone through, and a lot of companies have had to ask some very tough questions about what they think about themselves, who they are, who they want to be. And in some companies, I'll use MSI as an example, we had to make some decisions, not just about who we are and who we wanted to be, but what is technically possible. I can't fill an order for a 1,200-pound slab of rock from home. So that's easy. There are some jobs that just are not available to a hybrid environment. There are some jobs that might be. There are some jobs that might be with lots of extra work. There are some jobs that might on the surface appear to be, but with a deeper level of understanding and knowledge about the role or the function, maybe they really aren't. And, you know, I think the partnerships across the organization allow HR, again, to have an opinion on a tactic that someone may not have thought of. But I'll say I also believe very explicitly, actually, HR is not kind of the responsible party for managing company culture. We don't determine the culture of the organization. We don't set the company culture. We are part of a group that figures out who we are, who we want to be, and then we help build upon the culture that we've decided collectively we want to have as a business. And so, you know, and I say this, whether the leader is a brand new supervisor or, you know, one of the most senior leaders in our organization, we help in that regard, but culture is not our job. And I think there is also a bit of a misconception there. And so through those partnerships, we can help question if these are our values, if this is who we say we are, and I'm not living your day-to-day pain, but I know who we say we are, is this decision in line with the culture we want to have as a company? And sometimes that unbiased opinion, that opinion that is one step removed from how difficult executing an idea might be, is helpful. But again, I'm not determining that culture. I'm not determining what it is or should be. And it's not my job necessarily to change our company's culture. My job might be to help influence in a way that I think is important. And what I think is important is informed by my knowledge of the business, my knowledge of our core values, I call them my little birdies, my entire HR team that has so much knowledge about what happens around our business, mind-boggling levels of intimate knowledge about what's going on in our operation and the feedback that we get from employees, and then being able to say, how can I navigate all these data points to have an opinion? That's how those partnerships allow HR to influence culture. But it comes from that perspective of we're all on the same page about our values. We are all on the same page about who we are, or if we're not on the same page, if there is a debate about who we are, where did that debate live, and how can I help inform that discussion with all the data points that I have at my fingertips that may not be as readily available to a marketing VP or a sales VP or an operations VP or the president of the company who's trying to manage this big umbrella. So that's how those partnerships help us influence culture more than I'd say define it.
Yeah. Yeah, Chris, I really liked how you talked about how HR's role is to help execute on an agreed upon culture that everyone else is also executing on. And so with that, requires an alignment between HR and executives. And I want to go ahead, that's going to be our next topic we talk about. But I want to kind of set the foundation and have you talk about some of the myths versus realities for HR. So if you can go ahead and kind of chat us through this.
Yeah, I'm going to start at the top mostly because I don't think the top one is right. That's why I find this so interesting. Uh, I've seen this graphic probably 10 times on LinkedIn. So it's a popular graphic amongst HR folks. And I mentioned this, a little in the beginning, this myth that HR is here to protect the company, and this counterpoint, which is, well, HR is here to help employees within the constraints of the company. I would argue that's not even fully accurate. Again, HR's job is not to protect the company. HR's job is to maximize the profits of the company. And so we operate within a set of defined norms, and we influence what those norms are based on what we know about our cultural values, what we know about our mission, what we know about all of those things. But I think this is a really interesting one, and this myth is out there. But I like this graphic mostly because it gives me an opportunity to say, but I don't even think that first truth is quite right. And again, it's that perspective shift. I think the other one about HR doesn't understand the business. This is kind of HR 101 to me. I'll use the example. I don't hire someone in our HR organization, whether it's an entry level recruiter who has never done recruiting before and they're going to learn it from us, or a senior person on an HR team that's going to be responsible for 15 states and multiple, 1,000 people and all that. If you don't understand the business, you can't do the job, period. And so if I hire someone, they don't get to do HR work for the first month or two. They have to go spend time in the business. We've hired a handful of recruiters and other HR folks, and their first 2 months, I don't even see them because they're out in the warehouse, they're out on the showroom. They're not just building relationships with people, they're learning what in the world does this person in shipping do? And what in the world is this person's job in the context of this entire system in our warehouse? And why is it tough to be a driver at MSI? How is this any different than being a driver anywhere else? Or why is it easier to be a driver at MSI? And how is it easier than anywhere else? If you don't know the answers to those questions, you cannot be successful in HR. And so, yes, the truth is HR is a strategic business function, but that means, unlike most parts of the business, we're tasked or we are burdened with understanding the entirety of the business. We have to understand this business at an intimate level to be successful in our roles. I think this other myth of HR only handling, the hiring and the firing is probably was a truth a couple decades ago when HR was the personnel group and it was an administrative function. And that truth has turned into a myth because I think in some ways the understanding of HR's role within the organization has not evolved. And so I think the truth here is that the HR function or the HR team handles not just the entire life cycle of the employee, but the pre-life cycle. That if I think about the recruiting phases of our work, HR sets the tone of who this company is from the moment we place an ad online for a job to when a recruiter reaches out and says hello, to how we structure an interview process. Candidates are learning about who we are as a business, who we are as an organization, and it's HR teaching them these things. And so HR is part of this life cycle, not just to bring them in the door, but we're part of the life cycle of the employee once they're here. We're part of the life cycle of the employee when they depart. But really, I think what that means is we are, in many cases, the representatives of who this company is and wants to be. And that is a much bigger task than just hiring people and firing them. And then the big one for me at the end here is this myth that HR makes decisions or makes the hiring or firing decision or whatever the case may be. and I like this concept a lot, that we make recommendations. We want leaders to own their decisions. That's critical. I've talked to a number of HR folks that are almost upset that they aren't making some of the decisions they think they should be making as it relates to things going on in the operation. Like, I can't believe we didn't do this X thing with this employee, whether it's I can't believe they didn't promote them, I can't believe they didn't terminate them, whatever the case may be. And my reaction to that is, that's, you don't want to make that decision, because we want to be held part of a group, a village that is training supervisors and managers and leaders on how to make business decisions. We are in many ways helping to prepare people to make those decisions. I'm not the CYA department. You can't call me and say, hey, I want to do this thing, and I'm going to go, sure. And when it blows up in your face, you're going to go, but I asked Chris. I tell people all the time, I'll tell you my opinion. You have to make the decision. I am one of many data points in the data points you need to gather to make a business decision. I can share wisdom. I can tell you the 5 times someone had to make the same decision you made. I can tell you what my opinion was and what the outcome was, because I have a context you may not have. But this is your business decision to make. I don't manage this employee. I can't make this decision for you. Same thing, it kind of goes even beyond that, where I tell folks all the time, like, HR needs to get the word no out of their vocabulary. Part of how you damage the relationship you can have with the place is when you're the bottleneck or the stop or the gatekeeper, and, hey, we want to do this thing, and HR says, no, we can't do it. I even remember apologizing to some of the leaders during COVID, saying, I don't believe, by and large, in telling people what to do. I think it breeds lazy management. If I'm making the decision for you, you get to be lazy as a manager. It also takes away some of your power as a manager. I want a group of entrepreneurs. I don't want a group of people who just know how to execute. I need people who can make decisions, have vision, and grow this company. And I remember apologizing during COVID, saying, look, I don't want to be the person doing this, but here's the law in your area, and here's what you can and can't do. And we all understand there's a safety element here, but there was a period through COVID where I was pretty uncomfortable, because there was a lot of me saying what you can and can't do. And that's just because we decided to centralize who's going to go through and read these executive orders or these health directives that were changing every 2 hours, in March and April of 2020, and then every ETS for every state OSHA plan that came up with one. And so we consolidated some of that work, but it felt very out of place for us to be the ones regularly saying, here's what you can and can't do. And it goes back to this truth, which is really, I believe our job is to educate. Our job is to provide context and wisdom. And our job is to be data points so that business leaders can make business decisions. That's not to say there aren't decisions we can't make. And there are a lot of decisions we make at a big company level. There's a lot of elements of comp, there's a lot of elements of benefits, there's a lot of elements of a number of things where HR is the decision maker. But I think the touch point, particularly for people in the vast majority of HR roles, are in roles where they should be advisors, not deciders.
Yeah. Chris, it's really interesting. As I've had these conversations for about half of a year, I've realized that there are very different expectations placed on different HR professionals based on whether it's the size of company they're in or based on what leadership wants. And so regardless of what exactly HR might look in their business, I want to go ahead and talk about the alignment between HR and their executives. So this is a conversation that we touched on very heavily in our first interview. So if any of you are interested in hearing more of Chris's insight on that topic, highly encourage you to check that out. But with this, speaking on HR and executive alignment, Chris, is this something that is even important?
I mean, I don't think, ignore the individual. I could say, I don't think I could be successful without this level of alignment, but I don't think an HR organization can be successful, or I'll say as successful as it could be, without this alignment. And this almost goes back to some of my thoughts on a culture question to some degree, where I would say, it's my job as a leader within the HR organization of our company to figure out the direction of the company. If you watch the news, the sky's falling, we're going to be in a recession in 12 months and everything's going to fall off a cliff again. Now, while I don't think it's as probably hyperbolic as the news cycle is making it sound, there are a lot of tough headwinds coming. And as a business, if the HR team is not aligned, and if I am not aligned with my counterparts, there is no way we're going to make the best business decision possible, because those decisions involve questions around how we structure our teams. Those decisions involve questions around not just how we structure them, but where are they? What do they do? How many people should be on them? How should we be managing them? How should we be encouraging? How should we be reassuring them? And if I am not aligned with my counterparts, employees can tell. It's obvious. And if the company is not unified and uniform, particularly when there are rough roads coming, I just think you lose a lot of employee confidence. It's like when mom and dad fight. You know when they're fighting. it's no different within an HR organization. It's no different within a sales organization and an operations organization. When those leaders aren't on the same page, the folks in the warehouse and the folks in sales don't know what to do. Well, when the HR team is not on the same page with everyone else around lots of questions that start coming up when people are nervous, people aren't going to know what to do. So I think it's critical. I don't think you can be successful without having that alignment. But that means, again, it's on me. The onus is on me to figure out, who are we as a company? What are our values? What are our goals? What are our strategies? What's the company's mission? Deeply understand what the business strategy is, and then figure out how to create an HR strategy that aligns with the business strategy, and then figure out how I can align with my counterparts, because we're all working on the same team. And if it ever at any moment feels like we're not on the same team to achieve the same goal, bad things happen.
Yeah. Yeah, Chris, in our last conversation, you were talking about how HR is stereotypically seen as a cost center, and that they tend to kind of be the enemy of the executive team because they are the risk managers or the naysayers. And with that, I'm curious, what can the companies in the audience do today to speak to their executives to create a business case for HR and kind of shift away from that perspective that they are the Tobys from the office of the world or those cost centers?
Yeah, I'll tell you one of the things I did very explicitly, within 3 months of being at the organization. I'm fortunate. I will say we are very clear with ourselves. Here is our mission. Here are our values. Here's the purpose. Here's where we fit in the market. Here are the strategies, whether it's a go-to-market strategy for a new product or how we make decisions about how to differentiate amongst our competitors. And I spent most of my time learning that. And then I said, okay, well, how are we communicating these things to our employees on our team, whether, again, it's a sales team or a finance team or a warehouse team? And then part of what I did is said, well, why wouldn't I communicate HR's mission and how it aligns with the company's mission in any different matter? So we have these, we call them credo cards. These are these printed documents that say, here's our purpose, here's our value, here's our mission, here's who we are, here are the things we believe, here's what we say about ourselves. I just took the identical document, changed the words, and said, here's how HR fits in that. And so they complement each other. So there was a very, I'll call it practical tactic in saying, I'm going to just mirror this document and I am going to go step by step. This is the company's mission. Here is how HR supports the company's mission. Here are our values. Here's how we're going to support them. Here's our purpose. Here's how HR serves the company's purpose. Here are the things about ourselves that then build on this story. And then we walked through, and I literally took that and sent it to some counterparts and said, this is what I believe about HR. This is how I believe we should be supporting you. Am I wrong? And I just sent it to counterparts. I sent it to a few other VPs and said, tell me where this doesn't make your business better. Where am I in your way? Because then it's wrong on the document. Or where am I not providing the help you think you need? to make your business more profitable. And then we trained not only our team on it, we shared it with the company, and we kind of tried to realign in many ways as a very tactical step. But then, in all of the steps of our decision making, we go back to, how is this helping the branch? How is this helping the office? How is this helping, this group? And I think for others, the starting point is you have to have an intimate understanding of the business and what the business wants of you. And if what the business wants of you is limited, they just want you to be admin, well, then you're going to have to do some work to prove you can do a whole lot more. And one of the things I shared last time, and I still strongly believe this, is you've got to be able to speak the language of the business. And if that means, we just want a team to manage the admin, we don't want your input on this, or we don't need help with that, well, you have to, you should probably have time because if they're not asking for a lot of help, you've got some time to dig into the business and say, how do I speak the language of the business so that I can change how I'm communicating this? If you think all the business needs is admin work, and as the HR person, I'm sitting here going, you need help in 15 other ways, you just don't realize it. The other thing is you might be communicating that in the wrong way. And you have to figure out how your leaders think and communicate, and you have to mold yourself to that. I remember I learned that lesson at a prior company. I wasn't even in HR. I had been in HR, I had left, and I had come back. And one of the things I had learned was, having worked for this VP, I needed to change how I was communicating. I learned how to communicate with this person in a way that was effective. I needed to change how I was communicating some of these things I wanted to do in HR. And quite literally, and this was in a recruiting element, I rewrote a plan for our recruiting model, and I wrote it to mirror a warehouse productivity discussion. Said we can measure the velocity of a package through our warehouse. I'm going to measure the velocity of a candidate through our process. I'm going to apply the exact same strategies we applied in the warehouse to move a box from this side of the building to that side of the building. I'm going to speak that language about candidates. And I presented a warehouse productivity document through the lens of hiring. And all of a sudden, everything started clicking. So sometimes it's a communication issue. And unfortunately, we're in the job where we have to prove ourselves sometimes more than we think we should need to. You got to talk the language of the business. The other one is, I generally believe this, you have to be able to boil things down to dollars. If I'm here to make the business more profitable, I need to be able to translate a lot of the work I do to dollars. And that means if I'm not speaking in dollars at some point with my leaders, I am not speaking about the things that matter to someone who really believes their job is to make the business more profitable. So we are sometimes so far removed from a revenue generating idea or a profitability idea. But I think the area that forces you to think the right way is boil your work down into dollars. Whether that's, hey, if we look at us as a cost center, what do we really cost? What does it cost to complete this task? How many of those tasks do I have? What am I spending on these things? Then you can say, here's how much the company's spending on this thing that we think is annoying. Did you know, here's how much we're spending on this thing that we're not spending time on, but I put the same cost model to, and it's a lot more expensive. And in fact, I think I could address this. Here's how much it'll cost the business. It's cheaper than what that costs. I can save us some money here. And so if you can start talking in dollars and cents, and you're talking the language of the business, now you're starting to get an alignment and you're starting to get a buy-in that might justify why you need 2 more people, or it might justify why you need to stop doing this thing and start doing that thing. It might help justify why you need this piece of software that everyone looks at and goes, oh my gosh, this is way too expensive. And so if you're not talking the language of the business and you're not talking in dollars and cents, it's going to be hard, I think, to get that alignment, especially if you think the company's missing the boat on the value your team can add.
Yeah, Chris, in our last conversation, we talked about building the business case for investing in your people. And ultimately, you talked about how people equal profit, and how do you build that business case and speak in dollars and cents to show that to your executive team so that we can, start investing in our people in the organization. So that is a perfect segue here for measuring the ROI on those people-centric initiatives. So Chris, can you go ahead and talk about what it means to measure the ROI on people?
Yeah, I'll qualify this with one statement, which is, and I believe this is a very noble and important thing, but it is easy for business leaders to talk about people as FTEs, right? As full-time equivalents. We can boil everybody down to a number in an Excel spreadsheet, and it almost dehumanizes in a way that HR is trying to fight to humanize things. We're trying to build empathy. We're trying to build emotional intelligence. We're trying to do all these things that we all, I think, agree are great topics. And sometimes when we talk in terms of ROI, when we talk in terms of dollars and cents, it feels less human. And this is a position that I think the HR folks in particular find themselves in, and it requires some code switching. It requires an ability and a comfortability to jump between both worlds, where I want to talk a lot about how can we treat people as people, and how can we care about the whole person, and all the topics that you hear at every HR summit that gets everybody in the room all excited. But you also have to be able to sit in a room with an Excel spreadsheet and talk dollars and cents and ROI. So I will acknowledge that this is maybe a position that is a burden other folks in the business don't always have to bear, but it's our job to bear that burden. And so sometimes you have to switch over to, well, what is the ROI and how do I measure it? And again, your business has figured out how to measure the cost and the value of an employee in some way, shape, or form. Whether it's, if I think about a warehouse, warehousing is at the top of everybody's mind in a way I don't think it has ever been before because of all of the supply chain issues. But any warehouse of scope and scale and size can probably measure the cost in dollars and cents to put a receipt away on a shelf. It costs me in labor $12.30 or $18.30 for every box that flows through this department. And then there's a cost for the materials in the box and all those things. And then you use that to build a staffing model. And then you use the staffing model to say, well, if I have X number of boxes and it spends this much time and it's this many dollars, I can back into a labor budget to staff part of a warehouse. And it's somewhere your business has probably gone through an exercise. It may not be as explicit as that, but to build a staffing model that describes the justification for labor. And so one of the easiest ways to measure the ROI of your work is to piggyback off of the work that somebody else in your building has probably done already. How do I measure the cost of labor? HR is in a very good spot. In fact, we probably gave some inputs to that model in terms of what is the actual cost of labor. It's not just the base wage, it's the insurance and all the other things that we build in. And you use that idea to then measure the effectiveness of a topic. I tend to describe it there as, how do I measure the cost of, for example, turnover, since it's such a popular topic, the Great Recession or the Great Resignation, as a play on the Great Recession and the Great Realignment, depending on which article you read. Well, I can put a dollar to that. I know the amount of time I spend on the 15 steps to get someone in a building. I know the amount of time I spend to train. I know if I go partner with my operations VP and say, well, what's the productivity of a new hire and how long does it take them to get up to speed and what's the opportunity cost here? I can, instead of speaking in time, I can translate that time to dollars and say, well, they're only producing at 50% of their rate, so I'm paying twice as much for their labor than I normally would. So I can start backing into dollars and cents by partnering with some stakeholders around the business to say, here's how much we're spending as a business. And nobody in this room realizes it because I'm the one that actually went and talked to the 15 people I needed to talk to. And I can build it in an Excel spreadsheet So you can all criticize me, and when I tell you it costs $20,000 every time someone walks out the door and everyone looks at me like I'm crazy, I can pull up my work and say, show me on here where you disagree with my math. Let's walk through the math. Here's how much I'm spending in HR to acquire talent, my advertising costs, the labor for my recruiters, all the expenses if you're flying candidate, whatever it is. Here are those costs. Everybody thinks of that. Here now is the amount of time I spend in labor to onboard them. Oh, by the way, don't you pay a trainer? Of the work that your trainer's doing, they're training X percentage of your workforce that's brand new and Y% that's internal, that's moved. I backed out the people that moved. Let's just look at how much it's costing to train a new person. Let's do all the math and let me break down for you. If someone leaves in the first 90 days, here's how much it costs the business. If they leave in the first 180 days, here's how much money you flush down the toilet. If they leave in the first 360 days, I can back in some productivity gains. We're not getting something for that person, all of that math to say, here's how much money we spent as a business that just walked out the door. And if I didn't have to hire another person, I wouldn't have spent this money. And if I'm hiring people not for growth, but because of attrition, then I can take my attrition and go, let's look at the exit interviews. What of my exit interviews are, I'll call it natural attrition. My family's moving. I finished my degree. I only planned on being here for 2 years. I'm going to do something wildly different versus, yeah, my boss sucked and I wasn't trained very well, or man, this place doesn't care about its people. Whatever feedback you get, you can then debate over the percentages that are, I'm going to put this at the feet of the management team and say, this is your attrition. I can take some percentage of that and say, well, some people walked away because they complained about benefits. I've actually never seen that be the number one reason someone left the company, but I'm sure somewhere it is. And here's what they complained, or here's how I'm apportioning all this. You can get pretty detailed and say, gosh, 80% of our attrition, voluntary quits, I think was avoidable. Here are the things that employees pointed to on the way out the door. So I'm just going to take 80% of our attrition that I think was avoidable. I'm going to butt that up against how much it costs based on the average tenure of employee. And here's how much money walked out the door. And I can then say, now, if I can reduce this 80% by doing some management training or whatever the topic is that you think is going to impact attrition, you can start to sell your ideas pretty easily because now you can measure ROI. If I just kept 10 more people in the building, if I could reduce attrition by 5%, we would have spent this many hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm only going to spend 65 grand doing this. If all I got was 10 people, I'm saving the company money. Now, all of a sudden, this conversation shifts. Well, 10 people is not that much. Do I think that your idea might save 10 people? Even if I'm skeptical, maybe 10 people is a small enough number, it's worth trying because I think you'll hit 10 people. And if all you hit was 10 people, okay, well, what's my worst case scenario? 5 people you broke even? You'll definitely save 5 people from what I just saw in these exit interviews. Now you can start to measure the ROI, but my tactic has been, let's translate that to heads now. How many people do I need to impact? And how is that impact turned to dollars? And usually the number of people that need to be impacted is not that big, because if we're thinking about on a company level, our scale is a pretty big scale. It's not like I'm trying to get one shipping operation 10% faster. I'm trying to get every recruiting organization across the board 10% faster. And if I can do that, here are the number of candidates that said, hey, sorry, you guys didn't get back to me in time. I took another job. And if I could have gotten to them in time, I might have been able to hire 5 more people. Well, now I think I get 10% faster with one more hire in recruiting. That 10% saves me this many people. I can pay for this person by just hiring a few more people or reducing my time to fill or whatever that is. And so I think that measurement of ROI is important. It requires work. And that work is not always easy. A lot of what we measure is gray. How do you measure the value of engagement We tend to try to pivot to other things. And then sometimes that ROI is going to be measured in things that are gray. Your description of your ROI is going to be a little gray, and that's okay too. I think where people fall down is when it's always gray. It's always the soft kind of touchy-feely things that makes an executive who's used to looking at spreadsheets and numbers all day roll their eyes. And you can have some of that. If I can improve engagement by X%, if I could do this, if I could do that, sure, but it's the WIFM question. What's in it for me? If
Right.
I
Yeah.
can't tell an executive what's in it for them, and I can't boil that down to numbers, it's not going to matter. And so I think measuring ROI is pretty critical, but it involves, I think, a level of detail that is going to be important. But the biggest thing about it is you got to be able to show your work. I think it's easy for HR to say, oh, if I did this, I'll save the company this much money. And if it's not intuitive and they don't believe you, they're going to dismiss it. So I think the other value here is, now let me show you how I got there. Here's the math. Here is how I'm measuring my ROI. Now let someone criticize, I agree with this, and this. This one thing, I don't buy this. It doesn't take us 9 months to get someone up to speed in this department. And you go back and say, well, here's this VP that just told me it does. And in fact, here are the 5 examples. And now my partnership with my product VP, he's got my back. When someone's questioning me saying that there's no way this is right, you're overstating this, and I already know that he's going to say, no, this is right. And here are the examples from my operation of where this was a big deal to us. That partnership helps me sell this idea. But if you don't show your work, I think most of our work on ROI is going to produce a number that people will inherently be a little skeptical about, because we're thinking about how to put costs to things that the business may not have traditionally thought of. And so you got to, it's like, high school algebra. You got to show your work. Your work matters almost more than your answer in that scenario.
Right.
And that's how I think about this as well, is let's
Yeah.
argue over which point here I'm off. Let's fix that point. We agree on the ROI at that point.
Yeah, we really come full circle on the whole topic of proving value on how, HR can win corporate buy-in. So I want to go ahead and launch this quick poll question here. And, as we're on the topic of measuring ROI, we definitely recognize that there is a lot of help that can come from HR technology. So I want to give the audience a moment here to fill out this poll question, identify what are some of the areas that your HR department is looking to adopt or replace within the next 3 months. This information is being used for our talent acquisition technology buyer's guide to help us understand some of those trends around technology, what organizations are helping to prioritize. But Chris, while everyone is going ahead and filling out the poll question, what do you think are the top 3 things that HR should be measuring within their HR tech stack?
I think I've gone through this at 2 companies. My last organization went from having 75 spreadsheets that manage topics related to their people function to a dedicated HRIS system from a very large vendor. We're doing the same thing now at MSI, where we're really looking at the system that we built and talking about what changes. So the things that I think need to get measured, one, the availability of data and how easy it is to produce the data that you need to measure your work. Some of this goes back to the ROI. Some of this just goes back to what's the general health of the organization. But if your system can't give you data, the data that you need, if you feel like you're flying blind, that's a problem. And one of the data points that I care tremendously about from a talent acquisition perspective, by way of example, is time. Not just time to fill, but the time between steps in our function. I think the other thing your system has to be able to measure, or what you should be measuring for your system, the interactivity between your quote unquote experts, your system experts, whether that's an HRIS technology expert or an admin in your HR department, and your ability to use the system to its full potential, I think is really important. I don't care how wonderful the system is. If you can't use it, and understand it broadly, and you're not taking advantage of how wonderful it is, then it's just not that great. So usability is pretty important. And then that relates to the next piece, I think, which is, in addition to the usability of the system, I think the ability for that system to be flexible enough to match your processes, and measuring the amount of, whether it's by frequency or the number of processes or whatever it is, that have to change to match the software versus the software matching the desired process and business outcome. And one of the things that I have measured is, the more I have to change my process that could therefore potentially impact my business outcome, the less the software is probably doing what I need it to do. And so I think those are probably the three big ones, at least for me.
Yeah. Awesome, Chris. Well, that about wraps up our time today. So I want to thank you for everything that you've shared with the audience. This has been a wonderful conversation, and we are happy to have you back. Hopefully we'll have you back for another HR at the Table episode next year. But with that, I also want to give a big thank you for the audience today for allowing us to take up some of your time. These are conversations that we do every month. So if you enjoyed today's conversation, highly encourage you to check out what we're speaking about next month. With that, if you're interested in redeeming that SHRM and HRCI credit, stick around just a little bit longer. Also, if you're interested in asking any of your questions to Chris, I know we weren't able to get to many today, but Chris has allowed for you to email him or message him on LinkedIn, so he's happy to answer any questions. If you're interested in learning more about Verified First or our sponsors, hi Bob, you can also find our contact information there. Now with that, again, if you're interested in that SHRM and HRCI credit, stick around just a little bit longer.
All right, well, I want to thank everyone for your attendance today. Our guest, Chris Courneen, MSI's Global Head of HR, of course, our lovely host, Brianna, and especially our sponsor, HiBob, for making this episode of HR at the Table possible. We'd love to hear what you thought about our webinar today, so make sure to leave us some feedback on our post-webinar survey. Next month, we'll be hosting the CHRO of MarketCast in elevating your talent lifecycle. We hope you can make it, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of your week.